Wilbur Wright and Orville Wright, two brothers. On this momentous day, they were ready to test their heavier-than-air plane, the Flyer. The first powered airplane that would attempt to fly under the control of a pilot. The pilot was to lie on his stomach as he steered the flight. Would it fly? Would it not? It was a windy day in North Carolina. At 10:35 in the morning, the Flyer rose. It went up to 120 feet and flew for 12 seconds. With these 12 seconds, the Wright brothers had fulfilled man's desire to fly. It was the first controlled, mechanical, and powered flight. It was a triumphant telegraph message. Here is the original text.
They changed the course of human history. Here, Wilbur readies their plane for a takeoff. No movie cameraman filmed the epic first flight of his homemade machine.
The successful brothers were home for a double celebration. It must have been a very special Christmas. 100 years later, in 2003, the Visvesvaraya Industrial and Technological Museum in Bengaluru unveiled a full-scale replica of the Flyer. Displayed at the Engine Hall, this is the only one of its kind in the country. It's a piece of history, a display that fascinates and takes one back in time. Everything in the model is authentic. A 15-member team worked for 9 long months to craft this masterpiece. The Wright Flyer had been handmade by the Wright brothers. In its simplicity lay the biggest challenge. 60 cubic feet of wood, 400 meters of steel wire, and 170 meters of cloth was used. All material as close as possible to the original, except the engine. A set of 50 authentic drawings from the Smithsonian Institute guided the venture. Drawings that had been made after dismantling the original Flyer. The National Aerospace Laboratories, Bengaluru, provided the technical guidance. The Flyer replica is a tribute to the Wright brothers. VITM presents the story of the Wright brothers, the story of perseverance and brilliance, the story of an invention that changed our world. Here is the story and the history of flight.
Welcome to our world.
The world of flight.
Flying in the endless expanse of the sky, of soaring high above, had always been man's dream. If bees and insects and flies could fly, Even mammals like bats could take to the sky. Birds just had to spread their wings and soar. Then why could man not fly? Since time immemorial, man dreamt of flying. He tried in many ways to take wings. The attempts continued, but gravity proved difficult to fight. Then how did man learn to fly?
It's a long story.
And every story should begin at the top.
The top. More than 2,000 years ago.
More than 2,000 years ago, the Chinese invented kites. Kites that rode the wind and flew high in the sky. Kites proved that it was possible to make things fly. Bamboo and silk designed to rise in the sky. There were kites for work and kites for play. Kites that could be controlled by the deft flyer on ground. They even designed kites to carry messages, and then came kites that carried warriors and spies. Even bird-shaped kites that could fly up to 3 days were devised. Kites inflamed man's intrinsic desire to fly like a bird. They taught man much.
But kites were kites. They were useless without wind.
No power.
No control.
Some 500 years ago, 15th century artist and inventor Leonardo da Vinci sketched his flying machine, the Ornithopter. Leonardo thought of birds as machines that operated according to the mathematical law. He believed that whatever occurs in nature can also occur in technology. The bird-like wing-flapping aircraft was never tested. Manned flight continued to fascinate, but it evaded man. Kites led to balloons. They could float in the air, even carry weight, but they were balloons, rooted to the ground. Experiments continued. Gliders followed. George Cayley, a British inventor, designed the first ever model glider. But gliders lacked power. They glided from the top to the bottom. In Germany lived an exemplary innovator. Otto Lilienthal dreamt of flight too. He believed to invent an airplane is nothing. To build one is something, but to fly is everything. Otto Lilienthal started working on gliders systematically. He was able to make sustained and replicable flights for the first time in history. He devised 18 different designs of gliders in a short span of 5 years. 15 were monoplanes and 3 biplanes. He went on to become the first man to launch himself into air, fly, and land safely. Lilienthal's contribution to flight was exemplary. He died in an accidental crash, but he did 2 important things. He proved that the mastery of flight should first be in gliders. And secondly, he became the inspiration for the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers in America, who shared his dream of flight. They learned from his successes and failures. They had a mechanical bent of mind. They were also very curious. The brothers were a good team. They flew kites like all children their age, but unlike others, they keenly observed them, learnt from them, even designed them. They delighted in the flight of birds.
Why, you may ask? Why fly?
Only because of one simple reason. The gift. It could actually fly.
When the Wright brothers were little boys, their father gifted them a toy that could fly in the air. It fascinated them. It was the toy that fired their imagination. They called their father's gift the bat. Powered by a rubber band, the little toy flew. The brothers reasoned, if this can fly, so can an improved, heavier design. Their dream was born. Inspired and motivated by the work of Otto Lilienthal, the Wright brothers started understanding aerodynamics. They worked in their bicycle factory, made it into a workshop, studied wing shapes. They mastered aerodynamics. The Wright brothers understood the airfoil afresh. How it curved like a bird's wing. Wasn't that nature's perfect design to create the upward force? So what's special about this shape? The airfoil makes the wind flow faster on top, causing an upward force, lift. There is an added lift due to the air deflected downward. Both these forces together provide the lift required to rise and float in air. Have a look at the airfoil shaped wing. Air flows from a pipe onto the wing. Watch the ball. It climbs due to a low pressure created by the faster airflow on top. Block the flow and the ball drops. The Wright brothers had understood the aerodynamic forces on curved surfaces, the forces that could make their dream come true. They approached flight with 3 clear goals. Lift, to make the heavier than air plane rise. Control, the ability to steer and direct. And thrust, the power to make it move ahead. It was a 5-foot box kite shaped like a biplane, a glider that could be flown as a kite. The Wrights wanted to master lift, balance and control. They wanted to understand the effect of wing warping. Warping means twisting. The Wright brothers understood that when the wings were twisted or warped, the glider could turn. They understood that the lift force on the wings could be changed by lowering or raising them. The glider, they noticed, turned in the direction of the lower end. It was something like this. Notice how the parasailer controls his flight. He directs it by pulling the strings attached to the sails. When he pulls right, he turns left towards the lower end. The Wright brothers understood lift and warping with their box kite. They grasped, faster the wind movement, greater the lift. Something that we can understand with a simple model. A string through a straw to give it free movement. A wing-shaped airfoil made with card paper. And a hairdryer for airflow. Notice how the wing remains suspended in air. It has lift strong enough to defy gravity. Lift is an aerodynamic force. Aero means air. Dynamic is motion. The airflow above the curved surface of the wing is faster than the air moving below. This causes a lower pressure above the surface. The result is an upward force. At the same time, the air deflected down by the curved surface also causes an upward force. Both these forces together contribute to the lift. The Wright brothers understood that the shape of the wing determined the amount of lift. The greater the speed, bigger the lift. With these lessons, Orville and Wilbur took to designing their glider. Wilbur wrote, "Flight is possible to man. I feel it'll soon cost me an increased amount of money, if not my life." It was an ambitious and bold decision, something that could have indeed killed them. The brothers started work towards manned flight. A glider, 17 feet wingspan, 50 pounds, braced with wire. A biplane with wing warping control system. A glider designed to carry man. The glider was tested at Kitty Hawk, a perfect location, windy, isolated, hilly. Based upon the results, the Wright brothers took to refining controls and landing gear. They built a bigger glider. This was the largest glider ever flown till then, but all did not go well. The lift, way below their expectation. The control poor. It was a failed attempt. The Wright brothers renewed their effort. They worked like true scientists, became the first ones to test the force of lift in a wind tunnel. It was a busy year. They finalized design, experimented, innovated. They tested their glider again and again, and they overcame the issue of lift. With their first goal met, it was time to tackle control. It's funny but true that this very activity helped the Wright brothers in making their flyer. They applied the knowledge of cycling to flying. A bicycle is intrinsically unstable. Its control and balance lie with the person riding it. Earlier airplane designers had imagined a plane as a flying boat, floating in an ocean of air, something that would be able to right itself when rocked. The Wright brothers thought afresh. They saw the person in flight as a bicycle rider who would work to keep the plane steady with strings attached to his body. The movement of his hips could change the shape of the flexible wings and the rudder. It worked. A front elevator to control up and down. A rudder for left and right. Goal 2 achieved, they turned to thrust. An engine and a propeller to sustain flight. They needed a mechanism to increase the speed of air over the wings of the plane. Windmills were already in use then, and propellers were being used by ships. The Wright brothers understood propellers afresh. They thought of them like wings spinning in the air. For power, they turned to the bicycle factory again. They themselves designed a simple, light in weight, petrol-run, 4-cylinder engine, especially for the flyer. And so, they had lift, control, and thrust. Thus evolved the 3-axis control. Success assured is what they said.
3-axis control, 3-axis control, 3-axis control.
The flyer was born. Made of spruce and ash and covered with muslin. The bicycle manufacturers had handmade their plane. The framework floated with fabric pockets stitched inside. It was light, strong, and flexible. And then came the historic day. 17 December 1903. The flyer was ready to be tested. A movable downhill track gave the aircraft enough speed to fly. The propeller sprang to life and lift off. This is how the flyer wrote history. Orville had won the toss of the coin and got the first chance as pilot. The flyer flew for 12 seconds. This was the first ever successful, powered, piloted, heavier than air flight in history. The brothers flew 4 times that same day, a total of 98 seconds. Flyer paved the way for all future flights. So every time you see a plane take off, remember the science. The craft gained speed, forcing air to move over the wings at a higher speed and deflecting air downward under the wing. The nose of the plane tips. The angle of attack changes. Lift increases. It's strong enough for takeoff. The downward tug of gravity, now weaker than the force lifting it. The plane cruises at a high speed, high enough to maintain the lift. But it needs to surge ahead. It needs to overcome the drag of the air holding it back. The powerful engine gives it a thrust. It surges ahead. This interplay